The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 3, Dragon and Slave. Chapter 4.
Jack spun around so fast that he almost lost his balance, remembering to look startled and terrified. "What?" he gasped, his voice breaking off into an astonished squeak. That last part didn't take any acting at all. Suddenly, it seemed, the whole room was filling up with Brumgas. Each of them wore a close-fitting helmet and a sort of armored tunic done up in a bright pattern of red, black, and white. Some of them were waving slapsticks his direction. Others had handguns out and pointed. There was only one thing to do when facing that many weapons. Jack froze into a statue, making sure his hands were open and in full view of everyone. The next few minutes were a swirling tangle of movement and noise and confusion. The two Brumgas who got to Jack first grabbed him and pulled him away from the safe. They ran their large hands over his whole body like bread-making machines gone crazy, pulling off his jacket and comm clip, emptying each pocket, even tearing off his belt with the hidden money pockets on the inside. Then they passed him off to another pair behind them and began gathering up his backpack and the rest of his equipment. His new handlers searched him again, then handed him off to the next in line, who passed him to the ones behind them. Jack wondered if he was going to make it all the way around the room before someone figured out what exactly to do with him. But then this last pair of Brumgas spun him around, and Jack found himself face to face with a human male. He was a big man, muscular, with shoulders nearly as wide as those of the Brumgas standing around him. His face was lined and unshaven, his hair cut short in military fashion, and his clothes looked like they'd been thrown on hastily in a very dark room. The effect was almost comical, until Jack looked into his eyes. They were cold eyes, hard eyes, eyes that held no mercy, no kindness, not even a hint of human feeling. An eerie sensation tickled between Jack's shoulder blades. He'd seen eyes like that before, on some of the most vicious criminals Uncle Virgil had known. A man with eyes like that was hardly even human anymore. "Well?" the man asked softly. It was the slave master himself, Gazin. Jack took a deep breath. He'd had a whole spun rainbow excuse all set up and ready to go. A tangly story full of tears and panic about a bet with school friends and how he would never ever do it again if they let him go. It was the sort of story a professional thief would be able to launch into on a second's notice. Just that much more evidence that he was worth the price Uncle Verge was asking for him. But as he stared up into those eyes, it suddenly didn't feel like a good idea to spin such an obvious lie for this man. "I guess I picked the wrong house," he said instead. Gazen's lips might have twitched. "I guess you did," he agreed. His eyes flicked to Jack's Brumga handlers. "Bring him," he ordered. Without waiting for a response, he turned his back and headed for the door. Wrapping their hands around Jack's arms, the two Brumgas dragged their prisoner after him. After the crowd that had burst in on him inside the house, Jack had rather expected the yard to be crawling with Brumgas, too. But aside from a pair of long, squat cars parked in front of the house, everything looked the way Jack had left it. Apparently, Gazin had decided there was no point in waking up the whole neighborhood over this. The Brumgas stuffed Jack into the back seat of the first of the cars, wedging him between them. Gazin got on the front beside the driver. They made a tight U-turn, and with the second car following closely behind, they headed toward the white wall. Jack had caught glimpses of the wall on his way to the gatekeeper's house, but it had been dark and the wall was set far enough back from the street that he hadn't gotten a close look. Sitting pinned between two Brumgas, his view wasn't that much better. Still, it was the best he was likely to get, at least from the outside. Slouching down as far as he figured he could get away with, he peeked out the window. The wall was more impressive at ground level than it had been from several thousand feet up. For one thing, its 32-foot height seemed taller now that he was looking up at it. For another, although Uncle Verge had been right about the wall's X shape, he'd missed the fact that the top part curved over and downward, nearly circling up underneath itself again. The effect was like facing a huge, mile-long wave that was getting ready to break over the approaching car. Not the most pleasant image Jack could think of. The gate was as impressive as the wall itself, made of more of the wall's white ceramic and laced with gold-colored metal strips. 6 more armed Brumgas were waiting there, all dressed in the same red, black, white as the group in the gatekeeper's house. The Chakuk family colors, he decided. As the 2 cars drove up, the gate swung open. "Stop the car!" Gazin ordered sharply, sliding down his window. The vehicle braked to a hard stop beside the guards. "Who ordered the gate opened?" Gazin bit out.
"I did, Panjan Gazin,"
one of the Brumgas said, taking an eagerly lumbering step forward.
"I knew you were in a hurry."
"You opened the gate without checking identification?" Gazin demanded. The Brumga stopped short. Too late, his walnut-sized brain was starting to realize that Gazin hadn't stopped to compliment the staff.
"But—"
He ground to a halt, whatever excuse he was about to make apparently getting lost somewhere between his brain and mouth. Gazin stared at him in silence for a few more seconds, long enough for even a Brumga to work out that he was in big trouble. "You will check my ID," Gazin continued, his voice quiet. "You will check the IDs of those in the car behind me. You will then secure the gate. After that, you will report to the guard master." The Brumga's mouth was hanging slightly open now, his breath coming in heaving surges, like a drowning man coming up for the 3rd time.
"Yes, Panjan Gazin," he managed. Your identification?"
Gazin waited another 2 seconds, then slid a wallet from his inside pocket and handed it over. The guard opened it, looked inside, then handed it back.
"Thank you, Panjan Gazin," he gulped. "You may proceed."
Still staring at the guard, Gazin gestured the driver forward. The car pulled through the gate and headed down the winding driveway. Jack studied the train carefully as they drove, looking for the hidden guard stations Dracos had pointed out from the air. With only muted accent lights scattered through the garden, though, they were completely invisible. "And what about you?" Gazin asked, half turning to look at Jack. "Sir?" Jack asked. "You like our wall, do you?" Gazin said. "You were studying it on your way in." Jack had thought he'd been subtle enough in his examination that no one in the car would have noticed. But even from the front seat, Gazin had caught on. That made him both very observant and very smart. Not a good combination to go up against. Definitely not a good combination to lie to. "It's very impressive," he said. "Kind of looks like a really big ocean wave. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it before." "And just like a really big ocean wave, it will kill you if you try to challenge it," Gazin said pointedly. "Remember that." "Sure," Jack said. What are you gonna do with me?" Gazin turned back around to face front. "We'll discuss it inside." Like the wall, the main house was more impressive at ground level than it had looked from the sky. Earlier, Jack had noticed that the place had been designed to look like a section of rocky cliff face. Now, up close, he could see that it had been designed to be a fortress. The front door was flanked by armed Brumgas. Most of the windows were protected by thick rock overhangs, and a dozen gun barrels peeked out from slits just below the roofline. Either the guards at the door were smarter than the ones at the gate, or else the word had been hastily passed ahead of the incoming cars. Whichever it was, Gazin and his whole group were made to show their IDs before they were allowed inside. The entryway was huge, extending 2 stories up, with nearly enough floor space for a small freighter like the S&A to fit inside. The walls and angled ceiling were covered with paintings, layer portraits, light twists, and other works of art. Sculptures and elaborate decorated pillars were scattered around the floor, their weight sinking into a thick blue carpet. At the far end, a double-curved wooden staircase led up to a second-floor balcony. He caught glimpses of other expensively decorated rooms leading off the entryway, but Gazin didn't pause long enough for him to get a good look at any of them. He led the boy across the room, up the staircase, and across the balcony, and down a corridor that was only slightly less elaborate than the rooms downstairs. Coming to a plain, unmarked door, he pushed it open and gestured Jack inside. The room was just as plain as its door. A small desk, a padded desk chair, a metal guest chair facing the desk, and that was it. That, plus a pair of rings set in the floor for anchoring a prisoner's legs. The whole place had the unpleasant look of an interrogation room. Sit, Gazin ordered, circling the desk and sitting down. Gingerly, Jack sank into the other chair. The rest of you wait outside, Gazin added to the guards, his eyes steady on Jack. The Brumgas obeyed without comment. Gazin waited until he and Jack were alone, then leaned slightly forward, his arms resting on the desktop. Well, he said, his tone almost casual, I don't suppose I have to tell you the kind of trouble you're in. Breaking and entering is a serious crime on Brummagem. Good for 5 to 20 years in a penal colony. His eyes hardened. Breaking and entering Chukuk family property is even more serious, he went on. That one can earn you an immediate death penalty. I didn't know, Jack said in a low, pleading voice. So here he was, all alone with Gazin. No leg cuffs, no handcuffs. And as far as he could tell, Gazin wasn't even armed. Of course, the big man did outweigh him by at least 2 to 1. Still, a panicked, desperate kid might still take the chance, which meant that this was a test. Gazin was trying to see just how cool under pressure Jack could be. Of course you knew, Gazin said calmly. Don't play stupid. Your partner sent you there specifically to try to steal the gate codes. No, Jack protested. No, he didn't tell me what I was supposed to get. He didn't tell me any of that. He just said to get whatever was in the safe. He never even told me whose house I was breaking into. It's his fault, not mine. Gazin's expression didn't change, but Jack could see a slight tightening in the corners of his mouth. First, Uncle Verge had offered to sell Jack to him, and now Jack was trying to shoot all the blame straight back at Uncle Verge, both of them perfectly willing to sell out the other at the drop of a biscuit. It was exactly the way Gazin would expect a couple of self-centered criminals to behave. Probably the way he would behave himself in the same situation. At least, Jack hoped so. This whole thing hinged on Gazin believing the situation was exactly as Uncle Verge had presented it. The minute he suspected there was something more going on, Jack was dead. It doesn't matter who knew what, the big man said. You were the one caught with your fingers in the fudge mix. That makes you the one skip dancing on eggs. Jack swallowed hard. Is there anything I can do to, make things right? Such as? Well, Jack shrugged slightly. Maybe I could, work off my punishment? And how exactly do you propose to work off 20 years worth of prison time? Gazin countered. Are you suggesting you work for me for the next 20 years? Jack grimaced. I was hoping I could pay it off a little faster than that, he said. Maybe I could help you with a job or two? Gazin lifted his eyebrows. Are you suggesting I hire you to commit crimes for me? No, Jack said hastily. I just thought I could maybe help you out in some way. Gazin leaned back in his chair again, studying Jack's face. All right, he said at last. Perhaps there is something you can do. I'll look into it. He got to his feet. And while I do, let's put you somewhere safe. Guards! Jack slowly let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. So it had worked, exactly the way he'd told Uncle Verge it would. Gazin would now lock him up somewhere. He and Dracos would escape and get to one of the computers. And with luck, they'd be able to track down the mercenary group they were looking for. Behind him, the door swung open.
Yes, Panjan Gazin?
One of the Brumgas answered. Gazin gestured to Jack. The boy needs a lesson, he said. He needs to know the cost of crossing the Chukuk family. He looked back at Jack, and for the first time since the two of them had met, the big man smiled. Not a pleasant, cheerful human smile, but something dark and vacant and as cold as a penguin's footprints. Take him, he ordered softly. To the slave's hot box.